That's your main bait, and like I say, you could use a traditional jig or whatever, and then your leader, you just you know, make it whatever length that you want to, because sometimes, you know, it depends on the fish how they're at, but there's a lot of advantage. If you notice, you're in direct contact with either bait now because of the three-way swivel, so any bite that you get, you're going to feel it immediately, where with your traditional Carolina rig and your heavy weight is pinned down to the bottom, and of course this would just be your hook floating around here. Well, that bass can grab it and swim around in a circle with it, and you'd never know it. You'd never know it until he actually gets far enough away, he starts putting tension on your line. Well, he can have that bait in his mouth and spit it out, and you never even know that he's ever had a hold of it. But with the three-way rig, you're in direct contact, so you can detect those strikes and set the hook. The other thing is, you're going to get a better hook set because you're not having the weight in the middle of your line to take up shock from your hook set.
So with a traditional Carolina rig, once they grab the bait, until they've moved the sinker, you don't know.
No.
And with this, it kind of has that teeter-totter effect.
Yep.
Whether they were to strike your sinker or whether they were to strike the bait, you're going to feel it either way.
You're going to know it because you're in direct contact with it. It's just like you're tied onto both lines.
Right.
The other advantage of this, it's much easier to throw because when you reel this up to your rod tip, when you swing, you've got a swinging weight just like you would do with a normal lure, and it makes it much, much easier to throw. Because with a Carolina rig and a very long leader, it's more of a lob.
So it's casting versus lobbing.
Because you just can't make a snap cast like you normally would, or you're going to have a lot of problems. But with this three-way swivel, it's easier to throw because it's got a swinging weight.
What about problems with it getting tangled up on cast?
Doesn't. See, it kind of does that, but as soon as you pull it, it unravels.
Right.
And it'll, if you've ever watched it in the water, as soon as it pulls, everything untangles and pulls right along. I think somebody asked, well, what size swivel do you use? This is the size I normally use. It keeps, you can see it has a little bit better separation. You can use a smaller one than that, but I think you'll tend to have a little bit more problem with the lines tangling with each other. So, and you know, you can use whatever combinations of stuff that you know you'd want to use. You know, actually, if you wanted to, you could even put a Texas rig on this end with, you know, put a hook here with your sinker.
Sure.
And drag it, but you know, this has got a lot more advantages because you're fishing with an exposed hook, where on a Texas rig your hook's buried in the line, and this, you know, it's going to locate the hook better and it's going to lock the hook in, and it's actually more weedless than a Texas rig, so it's got a lot of advantages. So anyway, that's the three-way swivel and the advantages it has over traditional Carolina rig.
Well, I can think of one thing you didn't mention about it, and that's the quiver effect.
Oh yeah, that's actually right, because you can't do this with a Carolina rig. When that's sitting on the bottom, you know, of course your line will be tied here where my finger is, and you know, the whole thing about a Carolina rig is it takes this bait longer to sink to the bottom because it doesn't have a weight on it. Well, you can sit there and jerk your rod, and it'll make this quiver, so it's making this bait here quiver as it's sinking, and you can't do that with a Carolina rig. So
that's right.
It's pretty devastating. You can pull that thing along, let it sit there, and kind of picture in your mind that bass has been following it along, and he's looking at it, and you sit there and you give that thing a little boop 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 boop, and they'll eat it every time. So it's just, there's lots and lots of advantages to fishing this over Carolina rig. And you know, if you want it to make a clicking sound or whatever, you can most certainly add a bead in here with your sinker, just like you would a Carolina rig, so you get that clicking noise. Or you can just add a rattle to your jig, whatever you want to do. But anyway, so that's the three-way rig.
All right, when everybody's fishing the Missouri rig, you remember who named it, Bill.
Now, the other thing I was going to talk about is the thread that Dean Rojas was talking about.
A Pro Reel, or?
Yeah, Pro Reel was talking to Dean Rojas about hooks for soft plastics. And everybody is in love with the extra wide gap hooks. But, so I guess we'll just talk about that first. Okay, here's an extra wide gap hook. This is a Gamakatsu. And to start with, what I want to talk about, and I'll get more into that later, is this J-bend or whatever they call that is not good. One thing, you're pulling on two 90-degree corners, and I talked about that earlier. When you're pulling on a 90-degree corner, it wants to pivot your hook like that instead of turning it up. And then the other problem is when you rig this, you know, you put it through there and you pull it out, and then you turn your hook around and you slide that up on there and you bury your hook. Well, so the so-called reasoning behind this extra wide gap hook is because when you hook a fish, this thing will slide down here off of there and your hook comes through. See if I can get the darn hook through that thing. And anyway, you end up with a big old wad of stuff down in the bottom of there, and it keeps you from burying the hook because you got all this plastic in there. So these type of hooks aren't good to me. And the other problem is once that comes out the fish's mouth, and you see this flat surface you got here, well, when that comes between the fish's lips and it peels that worm down into the throat here, well, guess what? You've got a wall that you hit at times on the fish's lips, and you can't move the hook forward because you got a flat surface there pulling against the bone in his lip. And what that hat does is it prevents forward motion of the hook
on the set.
And he's just hanging on the front end of that thing, and then he comes up and he opens his mouth and he's gone. Because what happened is you never got the hook moving forward far enough to bury the hook point. The other thing that's wrong with these type of hooks is the hook point is pointing straight at your line tie, so therefore it blocks the hook point off. So don't be looking at my orange butt tail there. You guys not even supposed to know about that.
We're gonna make a video called "Let's Look in Bo's Tackle Box."
So you can you see that very well?
Yeah, let me get in there. Yeah.
Okay, so see what happens if this is the roof of the fish's mouth, is that scooting along, see, it don't catch anything. And so what Rojas was talking about is take a pair of pliers
There's the girlfriend. Party's over. We'll be back with you in a moment.
Hello.